Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. We have quite a bit of ground to cover, and that is everything from Ukraine is probably going to be the primary focus here, a little bit on Europe, and then some stuff on the Middle East, and a few things on everyone's favorite, let's just say, affiliate of the transatlantic ruling class who met an untimely end in 2019, in the summer of 2019. I'm sure you guys all know who I'm talking about. He just couldn't take it anymore, and of course, it was by his own hand. That's, I think, the let's just say the softest way I can say it for the sake of the platforms that we are hosted on. But there were some interesting articles put out in regard to, let's just say, some of his legacy and of his communications, shared by none other than Benjamin Netanyahu. But we will put a bookmark in that because we have a lot more important information to cover. I shouldn't necessarily say more important, but I would say a lot more pressing information to cover
hmm
regarding Ukraine right now. So I'll hand it over to GSP, the co-host of the program, who has once again put together a very detailed minutia minute for us to all figure out what's really going on in the front lines.
And when it's all over, you'll wish it was actually a minute and not longer. Uh, so let's start with the frontline news. We'll start in the north, where we're going to be looking at Liman and Seversk, but more focus on Liman than Seversk. So the first battle map is going to show you where gains have been taken by the Russians as of today, which is, I believe, November the 22nd, Saturday. Honestly, it's already old. This is probably like very late Friday, early Saturday, but several hours ago, well over 10. I've circled where Liman and where Seversk are. And so the circle at the top, that's Liman, and the one at the bottom, that's Seversk. And as you can see, the Russians have made a lot of gains since the last show in this area. But the gains that they made today uh, have taken place in Yampol, or as the Ukrainians say, Yampil. Uh, this is a kind of town wedged inside the forest and swamp area that the Russians had fought for so long with the Ukrainians. It's also roughly in the area of Seversk, where the Ukrainians very successfully kept the Russians at bay for really 3 years. If you look at the bottom circle where Seversk is encircled, um, you can if you can look to the right to the edge, and a little bit north of there is where I believe Belogorovka was, and that town was one of those towns that changed hands like 4 or 5 times. But that was almost the western extent of where Russia was, and then the fortifications that you see north in the forest belt, the darkish area near the top right hand corner. That's just north of Belogorovka. Um, that was like a lot of back and forth, and that this was another troubling spot for the Russians. But um, I would say in 2025, a lot of things have changed, and the Russians are definitely, since the end of 2024, been on a steamroll, and they have
I will once
managed
again
to.
reference this other map showing frontline progress from January 24 to November 25.
Oh, great. Okay,
So I have that up as well.
great. So that's our first overall map. The next map is going to look more closely at the gains closer to Liman, again at the bottom of the map. I've encircled Liman, and those arrows, they're indicating a highway. As you can see, there was a trench system that the Ukrainians have dug. One follows the highway, the other one goes a little bit next to it. Now, the Russians want to get rid of that pocket that you see northwest of Liman, uh, and they want to conjoin those two pincers before they go any further. The X near the top left-hand corner of the frame That shows Novoselovka. I know what you're thinking. Aren't there other towns in Ukraine named? Yes, many, many. You know how many Belagorska or or like Pokrovska, Pokrovsk. There's a lot of names that are the same or nearly the same. So yes, Novoselovka, as opposed to Velika Novoselovka. That's an area where the Russians are working on a highway. I will have a map. This is a highway that leads into the north of Liman. And of course, the other place that they finally took is Staki. They had a toehold that they got about a week ago, maybe 5 days ago, and now they've expanded on it. So Liman is in danger right now. And yes, you're right on top of it. So this red outline shows you the highway that the Russians want to capture, to stranglehold Liman. Liman does have other ways of being resupplied, but if you're looking closely at this map, you see that there is the Severodonetsk River, and that winds everywhere. So it's not impossible to resupply, but it will take longer to do so, right? Especially like if the Russians ever capture Svetogorsk, which is, um, let's say, on the edge of this screen cap, sort of center, um, in between the top and the bottom, then it'll become very difficult. But that would be something that the Russians will have to do. My guess is that they're going to work towards getting to the Severodonetsk River. Of course, Grish Grishi is Grishi is the next town. Now, that's going to be difficult because Grishi, from the looks of the map, has like a huge mound, and that mound is probably from mining. So it will not be easy to hold on to that area. It's also quite a bit of a distance outside of Liman, but it is an area they will have to eventually get. The closest town that they can focus on is Dobroshiyeve. Dobroshiyeve is directly south of this, where the new territory has been taken, and it's basically the next biggest town on the way to Liman. So, and if they cut that off, then essentially there's nothing that can go from Dobrosheve to Liman. And then finally, we'll focus again on the gains made in Yampil or Yampil. Um, Now, before I mention anything about this, the Russians have stormed and are in the southern part of Seversk. Of course, the thing to keep in mind is immediately Seversk lies on a river, and it is the low ground. But immediately adjacent to Seversk, just a few kilometers, like no more than 2 or 3 or 4, fortifications begin, and they are definitely on a hill. And so, for the Russians to make this move, it could be foolish, but it could be because they have intel that they're not sufficiently manned. Now, let's take a closer look at Yampil. As you can see, this is an extensive area with marshes and whatnot. I'm going to presume because winter is approaching, the flooding probably is lower than it would have been at the beginning of November and the end of October. Yampil, the town, is taken. It was, the extent of it, its southern extent was taken just today. But the Russians will want to push further to begin putting pressure upon Seversk. The next area we're going to look at is south of this region in sort of eastern central Donetsk, and that's Konstantinovka. Now, the Russians have had a presence to some degree in Konstantinovka, and following slides will demonstrate that. But today they took more territory in the south, which is, I guess, part of the economization of Konstantinovka. Again, Konstantinovka is another town that is situated on a river, And the Ukrainians do have a lot of fortifications on the east side, but the Russians still occupy about 95% of Chasiv Yar, um, which they can bring about pressure from that area. But my guess is they're going to want to go into Konstantinovka and bypass all those fortifications that are there to stop any forward movement by the Russians into Konstantinovka from the north and from the east. The next slide will show you a little bit better the area that's been taken by the Russians. Now, this is, I forget the name of it, but it's just north of Ivanopolia or Ivanopolia. The red outline at the top, that's where Konstantinovka proper is begins. But these are part of its conurbations, very much like Mirnograd and Pokrovsk can almost be considered one city. In this situation, it's almost all Konstantinovka that makes up the majority of the territory. Finally, one last slide that gives you more detail into how much penetration Russians have come into Konstantinovka. At the bottom of the frame where it says Google Maps, you can see the extent of the push that they accomplished today from the south. You see a lot of gray area in the central part of Konstantinovka, and that's because there is very heavy and very bloody fighting in this region. The other thing I should mention is Kupiansk has fallen, and if you now technically, I think Pokrovsk fell today, but there was only 2% left 2 days ago. But technically, Kupiansk did fall before Pokrovsk. But again, I mean, this is this really doesn't tell you anything. Like these are, pointless statistics, because really, can you really consider Pokrovsk and Mirnograd as separate cities? I mean, technically they
No,
are,
no,
but
not at all.
it's really the same city, right?
Geographically speaking, it is all one city. It is just a
Yeah,
political barrier between the two. And
yeah,
as for Kupiansk, I mean, when you look at this, when there's like 2 or 5% of these cities left under Ukrainian control, once they've lost, in my opinion, once they have lost effective control without any hope of an immediate reversal of the situation, then the city is lost. So when you had this situation lingering with Pokrovsk and Mirograd, with the encirclement, at that point, yeah, it was lost. The Ukrainians aren't able to do anything with that.
yes.
When the retreat is cut off, it's yeah, sure. There's a few holdouts, like they might be holding out on this little district in the city, but what's the point?
Mm. And actually, speaking of Kupiansk, I have some sad news to mention. So the Ukrainians killed 8 people, including an Orthodox priest and his wife, and I believe an 8-year-old was killed as well. I can't recall if the 8-year-old was their child or not, and there were 5 other parishioners who also died. Their home was destroyed, so they hid in a church that was also being shelled. When they decided, I am going to presume they ran out of food and water, and when they couldn't wait any longer, they left with a white flag, not because, of course, they were seen moving towards the Russians. The Ukrainians killed all of them, including the 8-year-old. That's how pathetic these people are. I disagree. Like when I see Russian soldiers kill um, captured Ukrainian soldiers, I hate that. Now, I did see a video where 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. Uh, History legends um, said that they might have been drone operators. Neither side spares drone operators. Drone operators, because they are merciless and seen as kind of like cowards, even though their
It's the
talents are
same way
important.
snipers are treated.
Yes, they're not going to live. They're not long for the world. Now there was a Russian soldier that was also executed in the Pokrovsk area. We're not sure when, but it's roughly speaking, it's probably from this year. and it may even have been during the fall, but I doubt he's a drone operator because Russia isn't going to send like a drone operator to storm a city or, you know, get into, one of the trenches immediately on the edges of the city.
Yes, the Russians have much more behind the front line space to put their drone operators. The Ukrainians don't necessarily have that luxury.
That's right. And the other crazy thing is in Kherson, um, one of the TCC squads, these are the recruitment officers for Ukraine. Uh, this was horrible. So they pursued a man and his 8-year-old daughter on their bicycles, and they ran them both over. Of course, they were killed. Like that. This is what I mean. Like if you watch the videos from 2014, Ukrainians would tell you up and down, "This is our land. This is our land," but they don't care what happens to the people who don't want the government that the coup facilitated, that the Americans helped facilitate. And it's like they're basically saying, like that TV program, Krematsky, well, we're just, they're useless eaters, 1.5 million of them. He's talking about like Donetsk city and the other cities close by, like, Gorlovka and Lugansk. So that's always been their view. They've always been genocidal that way. The difference is in 2014 and 15, there were far fewer Ukrainians that were like that. It's just that there are much more now.
I will say 2 points on that. Number one, if you want a good, just brief documentary style explanation of that switch that flipped in Ukrainian society, the guy who runs the videos from Mariupol channel, he doesn't only do like the city overviews. He talks about
Right.
a lot about Ukrainian society, and he explains, in my opinion, pretty well about that switch that flipped since 2014 as to why Ukraine went from a relatively neutral country where a lot of people were comfortable seeing themselves as ethnic Russians to what it is today. The second point I will make is that there was also a story, because you mentioned the TCC, I should bring this up as well, out of Odessa, because
Mm,
Odessa is the place I see, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen any other place, but Odessa is the place I see where you actually have some sort of civilian resistance against the TCC, where they are far more than any other city or any other oblast are willing to say no, because there was a case of an attempted abduction where it was the man, and judging by the situation, I presume his wife was with him, and the TCC officer trying to abduct the man punched him. The man pulled pepper spray on him, which led to the officers pulling guns on him and this woman, presumably his wife. And I think, judging on the video footage I saw, and it could have turned out differently, that they eventually just gave up. And you will see this in, like I said, I think Odessa's where I've mainly seen a lot of these, in the Odessa area, where once there is that resistance, unless it does resort to just like outright physical violence where the officer can overpower whoever they're trying to apprehend, they'll just go, they'll just leave. And I think that, and this actually goes to one of the points where, yeah, Ukraine's right now trying to ban Telegram. I'm sure you can imagine there's many reasons for that, but that's where you see a lot of these videos, these TCC videos. But I mean, it really
mhm.
is. I think out of anywhere in Ukrainian civil society, the symbol of you don't have to live like this. You don't have to die so Zelensky can embezzle $100 million and his top people can flee, while ordering you to hold Pokrovsk until your dying breath. It, it's. I'm not saying it's enough to make a change. I'm not saying it's enough to overturn the Maidan, but it is that real last holdout against, uh, I'll be frank, this death cult that Ukraine has become.
Yeah. There was also a Ukrainian soldier that was captured in Kupiansk recently. As I mentioned, Kupiansk fell this week, at the end of the week, or in the middle of the week, somewhere between, I think, Wednesday and Friday. And he admitted it. And he looked, I mean, to me, he looked like he was regretful, but they said, yes, we blew up the last civilians hiding in the houses. We blew up their houses. Like, just, of course, they're like this. You know, a few weeks ago, there was a boy in Moscow that had his fingers torn off. He nearly died, but he has managed to survive. And what they've started doing is they've started hiring people. Of course, these are people that are sympathetic, people who might have fled in 2022 only to do stuff like this. And what they did is they put explosives inside a wad of bills on the sidewalk. And so when somebody picks it up, it blows off. So it's completely indiscriminate. They don't care who they kill as long as they kill Russians. Um, like I say, it should all be theirs, and no one else but them should live there, even though for centuries other people have lived there. It's they're just it's
And you want to go back further. The particularly these places in Galicia, these Western Ukrainians, their ancestors were the ones who were put in internment camps by the Austrians for being pro-Russia during World War One.
mhm, that's right. That's right. I remember being out in Alberta, and there's a monument to all these miners, many of them who were worked to death, and it's both to Ukrainians and Russians. My Russian friend took me to it. It's on the way from between Banff and Lake Louise. It's an absolutely stunning part of the country. If anyone ever gets a chance to see the Rockies in Alberta, it is breathtaking. One of the most beautiful places on earth. But yes, so there was this very obscure, sad memorial. We parked on the highway. We walked a little bit into the edge of the forest, and there it was.
Yeah, but that would be certainly interesting to see. But it is, it does go to your point where not too long ago, even with that stark divide, like even going back a century, there was still some at least mutual understanding of maybe not that they're the same, but some kinship between them,
Yes.
which has been, and I know it's been brewing under the surface. And it might be, um, an it might be too obvious to say, but I do think it really started with World War II and Bandera when it came to just
Yeah, absolutely.
the level of mass violence. But ever since then, it's festered with the support of certain outside forces, certain particularly Western intelligence agencies that do stoke these fires for obvious reasons. It has festered into a searing ethnic hatred, whereas before, even if there was a stark dividing line along ethnic and or religious lines, there was still some mutual understanding, still some kinship between them. But now, especially, and I think it's exploded since 2014, and certainly exploded since 2022. You're in this position where they view it as an existential war against people they, in some cases, don't even consider human.
Hmm. I remember uh, right around Easter, there was a fire in Macedonia in Kochani, and something like 2 dozen teenagers and people in their early 20s died, either burned to death or they they you know died from inhalation of smoke. Um, the only people who messaged me with condolences were Serbs in Serbian. One of them, I haven't seen this guy in 20 years. And he's in Switzerland now, but I knew him when he lived in Canada. Um, Met him through somebody else, and he remembered to do that. And the other person was also a Serbian. Uh, so I understand this kind of kinship. You don't speak exactly the same language, but there's a lot of mutual intelligibility. The customs are the same, the religion is the same, you celebrate the same saints. Like, we had an aunt through marriage of one of our cousins who was Serbian, and she always spoke Serbian to us, and we just spoke Macedonian back to her. I mean, my dad and I know Serbian to some extent. My dad's fluent in it. I'm not, but I know enough. And my mom wasn't. But my mom and her, like, she just eventually learned Macedonian without ever having a desire to speak it, and vice versa. That's possible. I think it's hard for for English speakers to understand that because they're so divorced from other Germanic languages that they can't really understand them.
And even just among, say, the Germanic languages, the level of divergence that's taking place between them, or the Romance languages, where while there is some level of mutual intelligibility, it's not like it is with the Slavic languages, which are
Yes.
still much younger descendants from their proto language than any of these other languages families in Europe. And uh, in a certain way, as you were describing, it does create that kinship. But then we've also seen, and I'm not saying it, I am saying actually that thanks greatly to outside forces, we've seen it turn into what we see in Ukraine right now. And what the future between Russians and Ukrainians as a people is. I mean, go back 20 years ago, in the 2000s, I saw some statistics about this over time where about 2/3 of people in Lvov, Ukraine, spoke Russian as a primary language.
Yeah.
And you can attribute that to, say, Soviet education policy, whatever. But point being is, no less than 20 years ago, it was around 2/3. Maybe it was 60%. But point being, it was a majority of people in Lvov um, conducted their daily business and in their personal life spoke Russian as their first language.
Yep. Yep.
Poroshenko didn't even know proper Ukraine when he came into office.
It's just like Zelensky.
Uh, yeah, Zelensky, even worse case because and
Yeah, he is actually.
actually, I suppose I should go on this rant because I was reviewing some of the things that we had said in prior episodes, and with the scandals around Zelensky, I started to really research his origins, and I don't want to dwell too long on this, but not only was he a man who lied about peace, lied about reconciliation within Ukraine, this was a man who also portrayed himself as, maybe not the most devout, but at least nominally Orthodox Christian with his baptized children uh,
Yeah.
in in the legitimate Ukrainian Orthodox Church, only to then turn around and do what he's doing now. And I mean, there's a lot of things to say about an external rival, somebody of Zelensky's ethnic extraction, or somebody who, is unaffiliated with it. But I mean, at a certain point, even if he wasn't genuine, in a way, especially through his children, he did link himself to this, which
Yeah.
does. I know a lot of people say Zelensky isn't a traitor; he's even Ukrainian. Well, in many ways, even if it was superficial, he took steps to ingrain himself into Ukrainian society, not this weird post 2014 Maidan, but actual Ukrainian society, and still drove a knife into its back, and led to the
Mm.
death probably of at least 1.5 million people, with millions more displaced, and let's be honest, the death of his country.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you did want to
Yeah.
add any
Yes.
points to that, do go on, or if you want to finish up the frontline news, however you want to take this.
Yeah, I mean, this. I think you articulated it very well. Uh, so we'll move on to the front line. I don't have anything I could enhance what you were saying. So let's get to Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. This map will show you basically where the funnel is, and as you can see, it's a north to west direction. Um, you can see the gains that the Russians have been making, particularly south of Mirnorad. It's quite a bit, but the gains that they made today are solidify the last vestiges of what represents Pokrovsk's legal boundaries. Um, if we go to the next slide, you'll see I've circled the area where the funnel is. And as you can see, there's a lot of this, there's no discoloration. The Google map is showing neither red nor blue, and that's because this area is all wide open. And it's here that the Russians are exacting a heavy toll on Ukrainian soldiers that don't want to give up. Um, but yes, so you can see now they have taken the last forest patch and the last residential buildings in one of the suburbs of Pokrovsk, and now there's just Mirnograd left, which the majority you can see is in blue. But on the east side, you can see again there's no discoloring at all. That means this is a very active area. The Russians presumably are clearing them out. The Russians are also clearing out in Pokrovsk, which is all in red, but there's more active fighting when it's neither red nor blue. So, Minograd, I'm guessing is going to fall before the new year. Um, that's just the way it is. And then finally, we get to the Zaporozhye front, and as you can see, History Legend also had a video on this. And of course, the major takeaway is by prioritizing Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians have had to lose this area in Zaporozhye and southern Donetsk and Dnepropetrovsk. Dnepropetrovsk is the orange. Um, there was talk. You remember? I said there were rumblings. I said this in July that the Ukrainians might be preparing for a counter attack or another incursion into Russia proper, and that they had amassed a force of over 100,000 to do it. Well, that force that never happened, and of course they were doing this just months after the fall of the Kursk invasion, and this was supposed to be more towards Belgorod, and it was supposed to divert troops. However, they diverted these troops into defensive roles in Pokrovsk, and even there haven't been enough to take care of the issue in Dnepropetrovsk and Zaporozhye. So this first map that we're looking at, you can see way at the bottom of circle, that's where Gulyapolye is. Gulyapolye is the biggest town um, for miles and miles, because you're really getting now into the farming heartland of Ukraine, even though it's on the east side of the Dnieper River. The only big towns now are all along the Dnieper River and not really anywhere else. Orhiv is one of them, but that's quite close to the Dnieper River. Gulyapolye, if the Russians can take it, will become like a logistical hub for them. That is what they want. Now, the move that they've made today, let's blow it up. Let's go to the next slide. You can see they took quite a bit of territory. I think that accounts for like over 25 or 30 square kilometers, taking land both in Zaporozhye and in Petrovsk. You can see they have come to the edge of one of the defense lines that have anti-tank ditches. Now, this is going to be a tough going. For the Russians to do this, it is a risk. I've drawn an arrow where, like, I would have expected them to go, like, to go around this area, but and it looked like last week like that maybe was going to happen because they had taken over much of the areas around the Yanchura River, but they lost momentarily Danilovka, which they regained today, but they lost it for 24 hours. And I wonder if that played a role why they're not going to do a river crossing, and they're going to go head on, or at least not the river, not that river, but another river whose name escapes me. I don't know if this is the Yanchu or not, but Radishne, Nove Zaporozhye, those are the towns that they took today, as well as Nechaevka, which is in Dnepropetrovsk. So I'm just saying they have a buffer with the river, but expanding forward will be difficult. And if they want to go south to Gulyapolye, it will not be necessarily an easy going. So that's one of the things I think to keep in mind about this about this push. There was another push from the Russians. I don't have it. Like, I didn't bother making a screen cap of it. That was around Tokmachka, but it was a single vehicle. Who knows if they've even survived up until now? Maybe they have. I don't know, but we'll probably resolve it on the next show. And that is it for frontline use.
Quite a bit has happened on the front line, and I think that, as always, you gave us a very good breakdown. There's really not much more I can add beyond that. It is, I think, with all the years of alarmism about the collapse of the Ukrainian army, and oh no, I will show
We'll
this
get
later.
to it.
You sent me something. I will show this on the screen later. But but with all the doomsaying about the collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces uh, over the past 3.5, almost 4 years, I think we are starting to see the fruition of that in a real sense, where Siersky can issue orders. All the people under him can issue their orders, but the ability of the frontline troops to carry out said orders are severely diminished to the point where those orders, I don't even think can get carried out. Where and let's just dispel with the notion that, I mean, look at the reality of the situation where they're ordered to hold Pokrovsk until their dying breath. There's no room for retreat. There's no room for escape, despite ample opportunity, despite ample windows. Across the front, I mean, Pokrovsk was probably the most blatant example of this, but I think it was near Seversk, or maybe it was Kupiansk, but I'm pretty sure it was Seversk, where there is an estimated 15 brigades, which, assuming they were at full strength, is about roughly 7,000 troops, but knowing the manpower crisis, probably were not at full strength, that are more or less just left to their own devices, trapped east of the Oskol River and there's no real route for retreat. It's really only a matter of time before they get either captured or, worst option, massacred. And while that is one of the more dire examples, there are several smaller, dozens, if not hundreds of smaller examples of this across the entire front line in Ukraine, where they are completely pinned down.
Mm.
And reinforcement is a joke because you have to pull from one area to reinforce another, which gives a breakaway. You would think that they would start removing forces from the southern front in order to maybe shore up the Donbass front, because the Donbass front is the most vital. But the reason I mention all of this is because it is a situation that is almost, in my opinion, beat for beat familiar, where I suppose in this case the Russian forces proper, but go back to 2014, 2015, pro Russian forces at the gates of Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, ready to take the fight to the city. Now, I'm not trying to make it sound like this is going to be imminent, but we're talking over the course of the next few months, maybe into the beginning of next year. That's the trajectory we're looking at. Donald Trump takes a page out of Merkel's playbook, and although he doesn't pick up the phone, he comes out with his 28-point peace plan
Mm.
that he expects to be signed by Thursday, the 27th. For those of you who Like me, my fellow Americans will know that is a federal holiday. That is Thanksgiving. That is the day where people will probably be one of the days where people will probably be least tuned into news events, especially internationally, let alone domestically. Everyone's going to be taking the day off and enjoying themselves as they should. But he wants the Ukrainian acceptance of these points by Thursday. And shall we go through these points?
Yeah.
So I pulled this from Axios, the news website, and they have a few commentary notes, which I will add as I see necessary, but I will mainly focus on covering the main 28 points here. So, number one, Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed. Very vapid statement, if you ask me.
Mm.
Number two, a comprehensive non-aggression agreement will be concluded between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. All ambiguities of the last 30 years will be considered settled. Very vague statement that does speak to say like what somebody like Viktor Orban is saying that we need to figure out the security situation between Russia and Europe as a whole, but doesn't really offer any further elaboration on that. Number three, it is expected Russia will not invade neighboring countries, and NATO will not expand further. That's a more interesting point on NATO's part, but we've seen them go back on this deal before. And
Yes.
who else did they expand to? Georgia. I mean, are the Georgians even interested in joining NATO at this point? Because you have Finland and you have Sweden, you have Turkey. Um, so what? Ukraine and Georgia are the only two off the table, and obviously Belarus, which I don't even think is worth mentioning at this point. But that's a too little, too late proposal, and I suppose
Mhm.
Ukraine is the main point. But the time to stop NATO expansion was 25 years ago. But to continue, a dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, a NATO member, mind you, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for de escalation in order to ensure global security and increase opportunities for cooperation and future economic development. Once again, speaking in these vagaries, where that's we want economic cooperation with Russia, trying to dangle sanctions relief that the Russians don't need. I know there has been some sell-offs with their oil industry, and that I'm not saying the Russian economy is perfect by any means, but sanctions relief isn't the only thing standing in between Russia's economy and utter devastation. Let's just dispel that point. Number five, Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees. An update from Axios, a separate document details the terms of the security agreement. The U.S. and NATO allies would treat an attack on Ukraine as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. De facto NATO membership is what that proposal is. The size number six, the size of the Ukrainian armed forces will be limited to 600,000 personnel, with the note being there are currently about 800,000 to 850,000 personnel on paper. I would dispute that considering how many quote unquote ghost soldiers are there, with commanders overinflating their numbers in order to scrape paychecks out of the system. And the pre war number is cited at about 250,000, according to an unnamed Ukrainian official. Number seven, Ukraine agrees to enshrine its constitution that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include it in its statutes a provision Ukraine will not be admitted in the future, despite the fact they've made de facto security guarantees to Ukraine that in effect would have them in NATO. Number eight, NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine. NATO countries, including France and the UK, have been working on separate proposals that would include a small number of European troops on Ukrainian soil after the war. Their plan appears to disregard that possibility. Number nine, European fighter jets will be stationed in Poland as opposed to the current American jets there. Once again, distinction without a difference. Number 10, the U.S. will guarantee. The U.S. will receive compensation for the guarantee. If Russia invades Ukraine, it will lose the guarantee. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition, a decisive coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be reinstated, and recognition of the new territory and all other benefits of the deal will be revoked. If Ukraine launches a missile attack at Moscow or St. Petersburg without cause, which, of course, any launch they will be with cause, because, of course, it will,
Yes.
the security guarantee will be deemed invalid. 11. Ukraine is eligible for EU membership and will receive a short-term preferential access to the European market while the issue is being considered. Plunder what's left of Ukraine, I suppose. Number 12. A powerful global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, including but not limited to the creation of a Ukraine Development Fund to invest in fast-growing industries, such as Zelensky's Coke stash, including technology, data centers, and artificial intelligence. Of course, AI. The Ukrainians are going to be at the forefront of AI. Oh boy. The United States will cooperate with Ukraine to jointly rebuild, develop, and modernize and operate Ukraine's gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities. The joint effort to rehabilitate war-affected areas and the restoration, reconstruction, and modernization of cities and residential areas, infrastructure development, extraction of minerals. Oh, there's the mineral deal again. And here's the best part: the World Bank will develop a special financing package to accelerate these efforts. Of course, it's going to be the World Bank, the IMF. Ukraine is going to be even further in the hole to them than they already are, and it does make one wonder: where are they going to get the money for this? Are they going to court investment from China and the
Yes,
Gulf states? I think those are the only countries that really have the extra
I know
capital.
where.
Do tell, do tell.
Well, the Russian so-called frozen assets.
Oh yeah, we need to seize the frozen assets. Seize the frozen assets. Yep, that's it's
But
it's.
America expects 50% of the profits from the new industries there that'll be created out of the investment fund. A Ukrainian friend of mine messaged me today on Instagram saying that. And he's livid. It's like, dude, I told you when this war started, they're absolute snakes. They will use your country. Mark my word.
Poorest country in Europe, by the way. Even poorer than Moldova at this point.
They'll tell you that love is blind, but they won't tell you hate is also blind.
Okay, here's point lucky number 13. Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy, with the lifting of sanctions being discussed and agreed upon on a case by case basis. The United States will enter into a long term economic cooperation agreement for the mutual development of areas of energy, natural resources, infrastructure, artificial intelligence, data centers, rare earth. There's the rare earths again, metal
Hmm.
extraction projects in the Arctic, and other mutually beneficial corporate opportunities. And here's the big one that's going to win him over: Russia will be invited to join the G8. So exciting. The frozen funds will be used as follows: 100 billion of the frozen Russian assets will be invested in the U.S.-led efforts to rebuild and invest Ukraine. As you were saying, the U.S. will receive 50% of the profits from this venture. Europe will add another 100 billion to increase the amount of investment available for Ukraine's reconstruction. Frozen European funds will be unfrozen. The remainder of the frozen Russian funds will be invested in a separate U.S. Russian investment vehicle that will implement joint projects in specific areas. This fund will be aimed at strengthening relations and increasing the common interest to create a strong incentive not to return to conflict. Number 15, a joint American Russian working group on security issues will be established to promote and ensure compliance with all of the provisions of this agreement. Number 16, Russia will enshrine in law its policy of non aggression towards Europe and NATO. Number 17, Russia and the United States will agree to extend the validity of treaties on the non-proliferation and control of nuclear weapons, including the START 1 treaty, which is due to expire in February. Now, I'll add on this point, I think it is rather dangerous to tie arms control to any external issues. That should be one of the issues that should just be in a complete league of its own, should be dealt with completely separately, because you cannot use arms control as leverage. If we are to accept arguably the fantasy that arms control is a worthwhile and productive endeavor, which I think there's at least a kernel of truth to it. I'm not going to pretend like it's this unstoppable force of nature that will set everything right, but I don't like the precedent of using it as part of a carrot and stick game. Number 18, don't worry, we're almost done. Ukraine will agree to be a non nuclear state in accordance with the Treaty on the Non Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Okay, what hope did Ukraine have at ever procuring nuclear weapons? And they'll go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Budapest Memorandum, etc., that Ukraine transferred the nukes that it did not even have the launch codes for that were on its territory back to Russia. Which, if you look at it, it's well within your own interest to get rid of nukes that a foreign state controls on your soil that they have the launch codes to and that you do not have the launch codes to. So they can relitigate. Oh, Ukraine used to be a nuclear. Ukraine was never a nuclear state. Kazakhstan was never a nuclear state. These were nukes controlled by Moscow, stationed in territories of the former Soviet Union that were also once controlled by Moscow. You never had any control over them. They were simply on your territory. The Union
Mhm.
collapsed, partially by your own hand. You voted in favor of independence, and that's not even necessarily a defense of communism, but uh, there were merits to the union of these countries, regardless of political system. I'll just say that much. And we're seeing the consequences of the absence of said union. And to get to the point, the nukes were never yours, but Ukraine will promise to agree to a treaty it's already part of for something that it never had the possibility of achieving in the first place, barring some rogue actors in the West giving Ukraine their nukes. But continuing forward, they used the Ukrainian spelling. Let me try to pronounce this the Ukrainian way. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will be launched under the supervision of the IAEA, very trustworthy source we know from the Iranians. And the electricity produced will be distributed equally to Russia and Ukraine 50-50. Both countries undertake to implement educational programs in school society aimed at promoting cultural understanding and tolerance and eliminating racism and prejudice. The Ukraine will adopt EU rules on religious tolerance and protection of linguistic minorities. Both countries agreed to abolish all discriminatory measures and guarantee the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media and language. Note similar ideas were incorporated into Trump's 2020 Israel-Palestine plan. In all, Nazi ideology and activities must be rejected and prohibited. Now, once again, there used to be a great cultural understanding between the Russians and the Ukrainians. We were actually just discussing this, no more than 20 minutes ago,
Mhm.
that came up. And I do think the idea of the EU rules on tolerance and et cetera, that's the same thing they use to try to shoehorn, uh, let's just say, the rainbow values across all of Europe. That is why, even at this point, Poland has Pride Parade. That's why Donald Tusk is in power. That's why Hungary is the pariah of the European Union. And
Yeah.
based Ukraine is supposed to accept all these. And sure, they're doing it under the guise where, look, Russians, we're protecting your linguistic rights and we're protecting your religious freedoms, despite the fact that there's no explicit guarantees about both those things that name both those things. It's just vague platitudes that we've seen get bent. And you want to go to Estonia? I mean, or just the Baltic states in general. Many of the policies they pursue against Russian speakers and even church policy resemble greatly what's happening in Ukraine. It's not as severe, but
Mhm.
if you look at, in essence, it is the same policy. Um, so, I mean, EU principles mean jack in this case.
They will betray every one of these.
Oh, of course.
Plus, I don't think anything like there's already resistance from the Europeans. Zelensky, on the heels of this disclosure, this leak, and of course, the leak is suspected to be uh, uh, coming from Keith Kellogg, because Keith Kellogg has now said that he will resign come January.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of seething cope right now. It is quite entertaining to see, but
And
it
I'm thinking like Keith Kellogg thought this was too generous to the Russians. Can you imagine? Like they orchestrated this war. They worked on this war since the end, like 1947. And this is too generous. And so he's rage quit and he decided he's going to leak this peace plan. If you believe that. I look, he's not happy with this and he's certainly leaving. What's conjecture is whether he actually leaked it or not. You know, it, I tend to think, but I can't prove that, and ultimately I don't know for sure.
Yeah, the main source that claim comes from Witkoff, who claims that an individual known by the initial K released it, which everyone
Yeah, it's
assumes is
him.
Kellogg.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So to continue on to hammer out these last few points, territories, Crimea, Lugansk, and Donetsk will be recognized as de facto parts of the Russian Federation, including by the United States. Kherson and Zaporozhye will be frozen along the line of contact, which will mean de facto recognition along the line of contact. Russia will relinquish all other agreed territory it controls outside the 5 regions. Ukrainian forces withdraw from Donetsk as they areas that they currently control, and withdrawal zone will be considered a neutral demilitarized buffer zone. Internationally recognized territory belonging to the Russian Federation. Russian forces will not enter this demilitarization zone that we're ceding to them as part of their territory. So no Russians in Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. And they expect that to be an acceptable arrangement while those cities are on the brink of collapse, probably within the next 3 to 6 months. So I'm just putting a rough time frame out there.
Yeah. What is this deal offering that Russia can't achieve in the next year?
Friendship with Donald Trump. Very important point that you're overlooking right here. That's actually point. That's
You
the
nailed
that
it.
that is the secret point. Point number 29 that was not included
Mm.
on the list. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun here. Uh, Number 22. After agreeing on all future territorial arrangements, both Russia and Ukraine will undertake not to change these arrangements by force. Any security guarantees will not apply in the event of the breach of this commitment, which, of course, Russia will do all the breaching and Ukraine will just be an innocent party in all of this. As Kai Kallas would say, the victim in this war.
Yeah.
What a wonderful woman. She's truly one of my favorite people.
She's so reprehensible, and the fact that her parents made so much money during the time of the Soviet Union, and she tries to pretend she was like everybody else who suffered under the Soviet Union. Like it's so, and I'm sorry, but like the public just, I guess they fall for it, even in Estonia. Like I said, the love is blind, but they won't tell you that hate is also blind. So
I mean, I can tell you this, and I'm extrapolating too much, but there's a million. There's plenty of people like this, especially in the Baltic states, but across the former Russian Empire.
yeah,
She's an EU dog. Her parents were Soviet dogs. Her grandparents were probably German dogs, and before that, her great grandparents were probably loyal to the Russian Empire, so on and so forth. That
yeah,
they chase power, and that
yes,
if some circumstance were to happen where the Russians absorb the Baltic states once again, I don't know if she has any children, but her children's generation would all be
mm,
pro-Russia,
hmm,
and that's what these people are. No matter who rolls through, they will support whatever the imperial power structure is.
yeah,
Um, and continuing on with that, I mean, I think the Latvians are another good example of this. I mean, you bring Lenin to power and then join the Nazis, like
yeah.
very ideologically consistent. Certainly not self-interested in the slightest. But 23, Russia will not prevent Ukraine from using the Dnieper River for commercial activities, and agreements will be reached upon the free transportation of grain across the Black Sea. 24, a humanitarian committee will be established to resolve the outstanding issues. All remaining prisoners and bodies will be exchanged on all-for-all basis. All civilian detainees and hostages will be returned, including children. They just lift that straight from the Israeli plan because, in terms of, while there are, I imagine, some civilian prisoners on both sides, it's not a one for one to say the
Yeah.
conflict with Palestine. A family reunification program will be implemented. Measures will be taken to alleviate the suffering of the victims in the conflict. 25, here's the kicker. Ukraine will hold elections in 100 days. Parentheses, so long as Arestovich is the winner. And parentheses. I would accept this plan if Trump put that caveat in there. Arestovich will be the next president of Ukraine. I would say I would disregard all 27 other points and accept it. Uh, 26. All parties involved in this conflict will receive full amnesty for their actions during the war and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future. 27. This agreement will be legally binding. Its implementation will be monitored by the Peace Council, headed by President Donald J. Trump. Sanctions will be imposed for violations, which once again is a copy paste from Gaza. 28. Once all parties agree to this memorandum, the ceasefire will take effect immediately after both sides agree to retreat to the points and begin the implementation of the agreement. Okay, so there's certainly no reason for the Russians to take this. And
Yeah.
the Ukrainians, they're so desperate that they should take any deal they can get. But of course, there are plenty of factors stifling this. But I can understand how the Ukrainians would look at this and say, what kind of joke is this? This is completely inconclusive. Because it is completely inconclusive. This is the most like, ChatGPT may have written this for as far as I'm concerned. And you know what? Given some of the personnel within the State Department and the Pentagon, that may have been the case. I'm not ruling that out. Or perhaps they were smart enough to maybe doctor some of the words so it came off as less machine generated. But what can you say about this? Of any there's no substance to any of these points. Even the ones that sound like they're attempting to come to a solution for something. Yeah, look, we've been doing the show for 8, almost 9 years, I think. No, 7, almost 8 years. I'm getting my numbers flipped around here, and we've read through a lot of documents and diplomatic proposals in our time. And I have to say,
Mm.
with little doubt, I think this is probably the most vapid one we've ever read through.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's supposed to sound like, if to the average Western normie, this is supposed to sound, because remember, Ukraine is the abused wife. America is the police, or like the
Social
protector,
services.
the social services, the mom, and of course, Russia is Stanley. Uh, Screaming at Stella. um, I mean, like that's what it's supposed to do, and it's kind of designed to fail. Like, the Russians do have to play along with this, right? I mean, we've seen other proposals that are less generous, right? But the average Westoid thinks this is too generous,
Oh, I got something here.
because this is no longer a war. It's a um it's a domestic dispute. It's battered wife syndrome, or some other nonsense.
I've got a good one that I need to share on the screen, from everyone's favorite journalist, Jihadi Julian, because he had a very interesting position on this. So let me just go ahead and put this one up right here, so you guys can get an idea of what everyone's favorite hero of the Syrian revolution has to say about our friends over in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Donald Trump and his gang are forcing a European country to surrender to our common enemy. This is not transatlantic, immoral, anti Western, and surely not American. If Europe, and I mean all countries, are not rising up now, we deserve the war Russia will unleash on us soon.
Oh God.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Julian, for those strong words of encouragement. Europa will rise again. Us brave soldiers of Europa, who all happen to be Turkish, by the way. Don't ask any more questions about that, please. Will rise up and defend uh, the great shield of Europe that is protecting us from the Russian hordes. Or I don't know what the narrative is at this point. Are the Russians Mongol hordes who are going to destroy trad Europe,
Mhm.
or is Russia backwards conservative power that's going to destroy liberal tolerance and democracy, or is it both? Could be both for all I know. Uh,
Mhm.
whichever we need it to be, I guess. But on this similar vein, unless you have any more complaints about the 28-point peace plan that we have not already litigated, I want to talk a little bit about this U.S. military delegation that went to Kiev during this week.
Yes, yeah, let's get to that.
Because the Financial Times had some interesting comments regarding this. They reported some interesting comments around the situation, saying that the tone with the U.S. delegation and Ukrainian and European officials in Kiev was, quote, repugnant. So, Financial Times, quoting a senior European official, says, "We're not discussing the details." Um, and this was repugnant. Is that's where that one comes from, and I believe that this was. They don't name the European official, but they do name
Mm.
the U.S. official she was speaking with. Julie Davis was the U.S. official, And another official brief on negotiation. It's time for Trump's supporters to start shouting, whatever that means.
Shouting at what?
I don't know, but to continue on with a little excerpt from the Financial Times. The meeting in the richly decorated villa in Kiev's historic district was held that day after the publication of the 28-point U.S. plan. According to European officials present, the discussions quickly reached a deadlock. Davis told the group gathered at the villa, "As much as we support Ukraine prosecuting the war, there are limits to everything," one of the ambassadors said present. There are clear signs that Russia has a more powerful industrial base, and it's only a matter of time before Ukraine has to make a deal, Julie Davis said, according to the ambassador. Mark Driscoll, who is, I believe, Secretary of the U.S. Army, arrived late and, according to those present, peppered his comments with profanity. Quote, "We have to stop this bullshit," he said. "The U.S. military loves Ukraine and supports it, but it's an honest assessment from the U.S. military."
Loves and supports it.
Yeah,
Good lord.
yeah, just so. Love is blind, hate is blind. Ukraine is in a very difficult situation. It's best to establish peace. Gee, if only there were an agreement in 2022 that would have done just this. It escapes my mind. He added that security guarantees are part of this. All agreements with the U.S. Will be discussed with European and Ukrainian leaders in the coming days. A senior European official at the meeting said Davis and Driscoll insisted Zelensky sign the agreement for the American Thanksgiving celebration on Thursday. There it is. They want to do it on one of the, let's just say, least attentive days of the year because everyone is taking time to enjoy themselves, taking the day off, taking a long weekend. So go ahead, go piss this away. Surrender the war while nobody, quote unquote, surrender the war while nobody's looking, but agree to our ramshackle plan while nobody's looking. A senior official, European official, said the meeting Davis and Driscoll insist. Oh, okay, that's the part I just read. We have little chance of peace. President Trump wants peace right now, Driscoll said, according to senior Western official present at the conversation provided to the Financial Times. So the European schizoids, with all due respect to our European audience, the transatlantic ruling class, look, it's all one and the same. We're all under the thumb of the same people. I'm not going to deny that. But the most rabid supporters of the empire are freaking out over this plan that's more or less asking Russia to capitulate, which it's just a softer version of whatever Kaya Kallas or Ursula or Merz or Macron get up there and say. Really, like I said, these points have all been said before, and I don't know what more they want. If I were genuinely pro-Ukraine, which I'm not, if I were pro-Ukraine in this conflict, I would be looking at this, and I would be, like, putting everything I have into making sure that this happens, because this is a sweetheart deal for Ukraine. The people who insist that this is a capitulation, this is surrender, could not only are they wrong, they have a completely inverse view of reality at this point. Where this is the best deal Ukraine can get. This is the best deal they could frankly hope. I'm turning into Trump here, but this is the best deal they could really ever hope for, and they should be thanking their lucky stars that even such a proposal could be brought before them. And I'll go further. Istanbul 2024 is also a sweetheart deal for the Ukrainians. What more could they ask for under the current conditions? And I mean, I've said if I were pro-Ukraine, I would be the biggest advocate of Istanbul 2024, because if you want to destroy the political legitimacy of the Russian government, especially under Putin, take this half-hearted deal. Take this deal that will satisfy virtually nobody in Russia. That's the way you win this war. That is the closest you can come to winning this war.
Yeah. And they will. That's the irony. They won't.
Yeah, it's like delivered to you on a silver platter. If you want to go on about regime change in Russia crushing legitimacy, the Russians, perhaps tactically, perhaps foolishly, have given you just that. And you in your hubris, in your arrogance, in your blindness to reality, will not accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but if you want to continue on with some other news out of Ukraine, you have a member of the Committee of National Security by the name of Vadim Ivchenko, in the Rada speaking in an interview, he had mentioned that he believes Ukraine has over 500,000 dead soldiers and just as many wounded, and that
Yes, I
these numbers
saw
could be
that.
possibly higher. In which case, I believe that at this point, yes, especially they are higher, and that you are getting, in the light of this uh, Energoatom scandal, the the masses, I won't necessarily say turning on Zelensky, but losing faith in Zelensky. And
Yeah, I think that's a better word.
yes,
There was a small protest, but you have to understand. I mean, and I know you do, obviously. They are afraid of him. Um, you know, they. I think. I mean, I think a lot of them are. They're afraid of protesting. You know, they've done it before.
and I did notice from the photos it was mostly women because you have men out there protesting, they're just going to get thrown in a TCC van.
Yeah, it's almost all women, and it's almost always been all women who protest. Because, as you say, they're just going to be thrown in vans anyways.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes further to the point. Unless you are within a certain strata of society, unless you have the right connections, effectively, public life for men does not exist in Ukraine anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look at the extent that they'll go to. They, they will. I'm sure this happened in frustration that they drove down a man and his 8-year-old daughter on their bicycles. Like, it's pathetic. That's the sorry state that they're in.
And what do they do with this vaunted manpower? 5 days of training before deployment.
Hmm.
Uh, and all the effort for training to meet NATO standards, which Ukrainian officers themselves are trying to say are worthless in this conflict, only for the bulk of your manpower to be very probably some of the poorest trained conscripts you could come across, and their goal is to just hold the line and until they're killed, until they're wounded, until they can escape really because well, I think the desertion rate is into the hundreds of thousands at this point. At least that's what the speculations are. But on all those notes, Zelensky is doing some damage control because the warrants that were issued for Mindich and his affiliate Zuckerman, who were both considered to be friends of Zelensky, led them to flee to Israel. So,
Israel? Why Israel? That's
pure
crazy.
coincidence.
Wait.
I need to show. I'm gonna get the screenshot here.
Do you have photos? Do you have photos of what these guys look like?
Yes, I
Mr.
do.
Mindich?
I do have photos of what these
Israel,
guys
huh?
looked like, and I'll go ahead and
You
send
know, a
this to
lot of
you.
sex predators have been caught in America that end up going to Israel. Look at that. Well,
You know
well,
why that
well.
is, right? Um, I can tell you why that is.
Why is that?
Because Israel is a puppet of the American Empire.
And no, and the American Empire is the puppet of the British Empire. That's
It's
one of my favorites.
so true.
Yeah, yeah, the British are. Just listen to Roseanne Barr, everybody. Is-
I mean,
I'm presuming you're showing them this photo that I just sent you.
no, I am showing the one I did. We just send each other the same photo. We
We did.
just. I'll say Zuckerman, who was the one on the bottom, looks like one of those facial reconstructions of like of an ancient Near Eastern people, maybe even a Turkic people, depending. But this looks like the average man 5,000 years ago. That's what Zuckerman's face looks like. Whereas
Yeah,
Mindich,
literally.
Mindich looks more just like the stereotype, like what you'd expect from somebody of his ethnic background. But
Some examples of Sintashta, man, were quite pale. That's what I think.
I can't believe we sent each other the same photo with that. That's too. I I'm glad there's some synchronicity on the show finally after 7 years.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that after
Um,
nearly 8 years.
so I suppose we should go over the Europeans shaking their fist at this sweetheart deal for Ukraine and just other issues such as the totally terrible attack the Russians and not the Ukrainians definitely committed against these railways. But for starters, I do want to bring up more about news about the energy crisis in Europe. So this is according to the INES. Gas reserves in Germany may not be enough for the winter if it turns out to be extremely cold. Warns the Association of Underground Gas Storage Operation. So much for energy security. I mean, at what point? Like, and I know they said this in 2022, and that they were given a pretty mild winter. But I think although people didn't freeze, and I'm grateful for that. I don't want people to suffer and die as a result of these policies. What we did see was the death of industry in Germany and across the European continent as a whole. And if we are hit with another energy crisis, you could get down to the point where does start affecting people's not only livelihoods but their lives at that point. And I'm not even saying it'd be like a mass casualty event, but the elderly, children, the infirm, those are the people. If you have a heating and energy crisis, who are the ones who are going to die off. And I suppose from Western countries, and perhaps Germany isn't the case, but you look at a number of Western countries that have legalized euthanasia. Then what do they care if the weak populations don't survive? I mean, they're pretty callous about that as is.
Well, they're saying there's been another wave of Ukrainians entering Europe. The Ukrainian Ministry of Energy today said all major thermal power plants and hydroelectric power plants in the country are damaged.
Wow.
When you see those satellite images of Ukraine at night, it's like, except for a few dots, and I mean no more than a handful, less than a handful, like let's say four or five. It's just all black. And I mean, I think this is something that Putin really didn't want to do. He didn't do it in 2022. He still didn't do it in 2023. I mean, yes, he would hit the odd thermal power plant or electric power plant or distribution plant, but not enough to like I'm just saying there's an escalation this year, and I feel like a lot of it is manifesting because of the relentless attacks on Russian oil refineries and gas refineries. And the British have helped the Ukrainians all along the way with this. So we talked on the show that they must be using a kind of drone that's almost impossible to pick up, and the material will be made up mostly of plastics. That's true. From what I've learned this week, they're low flying and they imitate the speed at which migratory birds in the fall are flying. That's why we saw so many in the fall and late summer attacks on energy infrastructures in Russia. The Russians, I mean, their statement is, yes, this has had a negative impact on us, but it's not permanent. Make of that what you will,
Yes.
half empty, half full. But that would go a long way to explain. But I think it's also provoked those Russians who wanted Putin to be more hardline since the beginning of this war, to attack their energy infrastructure as a kind of retribution for what they're doing. Not that Russians haven't attacked Ukrainian refineries; they have, but not to the extent that Ukrainians have towards Russians.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up because that does kind of lead into my next point with the state of Ukraine and Europe as a whole. is that Pistorius is running his mouth again, saying quote, Putin does not hide his imperial fantasies. Believes a war between NATO and Russia could start in 2029. There's that number again. They keep bringing up this figure here.
2029 and 2027, they just never stop. I mean, that they're prepping us, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, what wars are to be fought under current industrial capacity of just the collective West? I mean, unless they're hiding something from us that we don't know about. But to reference,
And they could be. Now, if I could just interject, if
no, please
you,
do.
again, I'm going to bring it back to the video that the History Legends did today. Now, he's dealt with this topic before, so have we, but it's timely considering what we're talking about. And I know we talk about it nearly every show, and that is, NATO troops or European troops on the ground in Ukraine. When does it happen? Is it inevitable? How much can they muster? So he went over complaints by Ukrainians who were being trained by Poles in Poland along with Czechs. They simulate fights, and when drones are introduced, uh, it was between Ukrainians defending and a Czech squadron. I don't know what the size of each side was, but there was a river, and they're supposed to simulate a battle where the Ukrainians are defending the river and the Czechs are attacking. And the Ukrainians thought, oh, well, okay, go ahead, attack. And the Ukrainians sent their drones. And, this is a mock battle, so they didn't actually kill them. The Czech commander became upset. He said, well, you're spotting us too early because of the drones. And the Ukrainian commander and his troops said, well, this is what the war is like. The call sign of the general, or I don't know if he was a general, but he was a high ranking officer. He was so disgusted, he left and went back to the front line in Ukraine. So how prepared, like you never can tell what they'll do. But on the other hand, like, what are they going to do? Do you know what I mean? I don't like, we're talking the fall of 2025. We're talking August and September of this year. That doesn't sound like they're ready. And I don't think they're doing that as an elaborate hoax to put the Russians, off guard. Now, the Russians did recruit another 130,000 men, but the vast majority of all of those men have been moved to Belarus, Kaliningrad, and Finland, and also along the Baltic states. Well, that was only just two guys, because this Baltic. Joking. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, the Estonians, they're Mosin Nagant. They're a very formidable fighting force.
Yeah, I mean, so that gives you, idea that Russia is still expecting something, but but I mean, if the incursion would come, maybe it would come from somewhere else and not in Ukraine, right? It would have to be a way, it would have to split Russia's resources. Russia right now is out producing Ukraine in drones. And the way this war is being fought, people talk about, like, they're making comparisons with World War One. Honestly, if World War One had drones, there would be even less territory that was taken than was taken now. It's phenomenal how much territory actually has been taken, considering the role of drones. But the role of drones have completely changed this war. But anyways, do go on. I've gone off topic, but I just wanted to say,
you're actually,
if they're going to do it,
you're completely on topic. I'm glad you brought this up, because this does touch on the point where they keep ringing the alarm bells. 2027, 2028, 2029. There's going to be the big Euro-Russia war, where the Europeans are. I mean, they're caught with their pants down. There's nothing they can do to prepare in time when it comes to industrial capacity, when it comes to fighting force capability, to get ready for a war in 2029. It's as morbid as it sounds on the part of people like Pistorius and Kaya Kallas and all of these people. It is wishful thinking. They want this to happen. They think they can march in and destroy the Russians. The Ukrainians, they were just a meat shield. They were just the first wave to batter down the Russians so we can go in and deliver the final blow and win this war and have our, little rainbow coalition European Union exist for eternity. That's what these people think in many ways. But unless there are extraordinary measures, probably in the form of false flag, they're not getting their vaunted 2028, 2029 war whenever they're planning for it, because even let's just say 2029 is the time frame. That's just over 3 years away. There's no level of preparation under current circumstances that could lead up to a NATO Russia war by 2029. Even assuming direct American involvement, we're still. The estimates from the 12-day war between Iran and Israel that American interceptor missile stockpiles, are going to take 3 to 7 years to replenish under current conditions.
Right, but this, you do hear there is a kind of repetition, a pattern that is developed in this war. When Ukraine is starting to lose territory more rapidly, they begin shelling civilian centers in Russia or Russian territories in Ukraine. And the Europeans start talking about we should have enlistment. As soon as it's a peace, we're going in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's this kind of like wishing the progress wasn't happening, and basically saying that the more Russia takes, the more we're committed to eventually get into a war with Russia. And the worst I've seen so far was just said a couple of days ago by the basically he's the chief of staff of France's army, Fabien Mandon, said, we have to accept to lose our children. Like he's basically telling them, like, we have to accept that our children are going to die for the sake of, I don't know, Euro and American global homo like empire. Like, really?
It's okay. They can
But that's
replace
the
them with
worst I've seen
Algerians.
so far. Hmm?
They can replace them with Algerians. It'll all even
Oh
out.
yeah.
Yeah, Macron is very Jupiterian. He's like the next Napoleon. He's like the next little emperor, and he's just so based. And he's gonna send French boys to war while bringing Algerians to pay the pensions, even though they're gonna take more out of the system than they put in. And this is all actually very Jupiterian. It's all Apollonian. Trust me.
Yes.
Oh, but speaking of false flags in Europe, I suppose we should talk about this Russian sabotage against the Polish railways.
Oh yes, Russian sabotage. One of them was the Ukrainian, I believe.
I can't believe the Ukrainians would do this. Maybe Aristovich was right that Russia, Ukraine, Belarus are going to unite and they're going to steamroll the toy armies of Europe.
The toy armies. Yeah.
But it was a rail link between, I believe, one of the cities in Eastern Poland. I think it might have been Lublin, Poland, and Ternopil in Western Ukraine. And it was sabotaged over the course of this past week, in which case you had Tusk and you had the defense minister both come out and accuse Russia of sabotage of the railway, although nobody has been detained. Even though Tusk does outright accuse Ukrainian nationals of having conducted this attack. And this is from Kozniak Kamish, who is the defense minister. Only when the criminals are caught will we have absolute certainty. But analyzing the events that happened in Poland and Europe, all traces lead east to Russia. This is the part of the war they are waging against NATO, against Europe, against us. A hybrid war, a war meant to sow fear and disorder, a strategy to weaken the West. and that Tusk has said he's going to raise terrorism alertness levels through the Polish parliament uh, because of the attacks, and that they're going to demand that Russia and Belarus hand over the Ukrainian saboteurs who they suspect of having attacked the railways in Ukraine. And I want this in the context of a couple of news stories over the past, say, 2 months. The first one is the alleged Russian drone attack on Poland, which likely came from Ukraine, where these decoy drones flooded Polish skies and amounted no casualties or any destruction of any sort of infrastructure or military targets. The second is, I believe it was about a month after the drone attacks. Donald Tusk was bloviating about something, saying, I have heard many Poles say, oh, this is not our war, this is not our war, etc., etc., etc. But it is our war. We have to care. We have to get involved. And more you have these events happening in Poland that are designed to drag them further into this conflict, further than they already are. And of course, they were kvetching about the 28-point peace plan. Tusk saying it's an outrage to Europe. We should all be very offended on the behalf of all of Europe. Navratsky, who some people foolishly believed was going to be some sort of great anti-Ukrainian force in Poland, was talking about, well, how dare they establish European fighters in Poland without our consent, despite the fact that our country has just become a giant NATO base? How dare they? And with story, well, I'm not sure what to make of it. It probably, if I had to imagine, were Ukrainians acting either on behalf of the Ukrainian state or as independent actors trying to stoke a false flag, which Tusk and Navratsky and the entire Polish government took the bait of, saying that these are Ukrainian nationals who are being puppeteered by Russia and Belarus in order to provoke a war with us. I mean, I don't think anything will come of this, but it does show their attempts to try to make Euro Russia war by 2029 happen. And it is going to be an incident like that. It's going to be an incident involving Kaliningrad, the Baltic states, or possibly even as far north as Finland. I think the avenue of, say, anything out of Ukraine or even in the Caucasus has been closed off, and that is going to be the flashpoint there. And that so long as people like Tusk and like Navratsky are in power in Poland, we're going to get this. And of course, you get a Duda coming out. You'll notice that Andrzej Duda decided to hold all of his reasonable comments until he was the outgoing president and now former president of Ukraine, saying that, well, Poland was kind of dragged into this war. We didn't want any part of it, despite the fact that I helped directly facilitate Poland becoming a supply hub for this war and being just a NATO base in general. So he is weaseling his way around that now that he's out of office. He can, oh, I said the right things now. It's okay. We, got that taken care of. Thank you for your service, Mr. Duda. That's much appreciated now that you have no political power to speak of. But if there are, and with all due respect to the Poles, like I said, there are people I have a great deal of affection for, but often fall into these kind of traps and have throughout their history. And I think if there's going to be any false flag that triggers a larger European conflict, unfortunately, it is probably going to be Poland and or the Baltic states taking the bait.
Yeah, I mean, Poland fell for this in World War II by, Britain promising to defend them when they knew they couldn't. And um and then, Ukraine too has kind of fallen for this as well.
It's okay. They're going to get security guarantees, though.
Yeah.
It's all taken care of. It's all squared away. Security guarantees are on the way. Um, Gee, I suppose that's all the European news I had. If you want to read this Jacobin article that Yahoo tweeted out, unless you have any further points of interest when it
The
comes to
only
Europe.
the only point I'll make is I did watch Scott Ritter is in Russia. Apparently he went there in August, but Putin wasn't there because Putin went to Alaska and has already started carving up Alaska.
Oh no.
No, but one of the things he said was he could read on the faces and even um, came to understand from speaking with some of the people that he met who have sons uh, who volunteered in the war to go fight, that they are weary of the war. They wanted to end, but they wanted to end in victory. Russia still has to finish this war, right? And as I've said often, even the Ukrainians, probably one of the reasons why they're sacrificing themselves is ultimately they believe that they can outlast Russia, right? That's ultimately what they think, and Russia, to some degree, does have to think about that. How does this end? On the other hand, I think Russia has recalibrated their approach since, early April 2022, when basically peace was destroyed after Boris Johnson paid a visit to Kiev. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Russians try to look eager, that they're interested in some kind of a peace deal. But you can see, no matter how generous this peace deal is towards the Russians, um, the Europeans are still hesitant to go along with it. And I mean, that's ironic because they were hesitant before the war started and after the war started. But then, the change came really with the inauguration of Trump's second term, where they've become much more vociferous to keep this war going. Partly because they had less disputes with the way Biden was conducting the war, or whoever was in charge of America during that time.
What do you mean? Biden was as sharp as a tack.
Yeah. So, anyways, do go on to what our friend Benjamin Netanyahu has written.
Well, I'll clarify. He did not write this, but he did break his Twitter silence of a few days, which these days is unprecedented for public figures, to tweet out an article by Jacobin, which, if you allow me to go to what they call themselves, let me go ahead and get the description from themselves here, uh, because I want to be as accurate as possible, and I will go ahead and get this up because Netanyahu is supposed to be a very right wing nationalist figure, if I am informed correctly. So, what they have right here is on their About section. I'll go ahead and pull this up on the screen here. Let me adjust that so you guys can see it. Jacobin is a leading voice of the American left, offering socialist perspectives on politics, economic, and culture. The print magazine released quarterly and reaches 75,000 subscribers, in addition to an web audience of over 3 million a month. Wow.
Hmm.
So, very right wing, far right nationalistic source we have right here. That's one of their other pages here. But let me just go ahead and get this Epstein one right here. So, Jeffrey Epstein claimed to have meddled in Israel's elections. New released information showed Jeffrey Epstein claiming to have been involved with Ehud Barak's 2019 election challenge to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's well past time to ask the question about the billionaire pedo's link to Israel. Quote, now you can understand why Trump wakes up in the middle of the night sweating when he hears that you and I are friends, end quote. That is one of the sensational, damning Jeffrey Epstein messages that has been routinely quoted since being extracted from the more than 20,000 documents released by the House Oversight Committee last week. A seeming reference to the power Epstein held via the damaging information he had amassed on the rich and influential, and the now president included. Yet oddly, what there what has been universally left out of the media coverage of that quote is in reference to Epstein appeared to be taking credit for former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak's re entry into Israeli politics in 2019, which aimed to topple current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the second of what would be three Israeli elections that year. I remember that 2019, Israel just kept having elections. We covered all of them meticulously. That was before there were too many like outright wars going on, and we could take the time to do that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. The quote missing context fits squarely in the unofficial omerta in the mainstream press discussing Epstein's relationship to Israel, namely the long-standing claims and rumors that the billionaire pedo had been an asset of the that had been an asset otherwise worked for Israeli intelligence, which is a very anti-Semitic conspiracy. That code of silence has been on the verge of breaking down over the past month after DropSite published a series of stories based on Barak's hacked emails showing Epstein quietly carrying out work on behalf of the Israeli government. I will say I want to go through a few of those, not now, but at some point in a program in the future, actually read through those because those are actually pretty interesting articles that DropSite did put out there. Uh, so continue on from there. On Sunday, former Donald Trump ally Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene pointed to the drop site reporting while on CNN to charge that the right question to ask was Jeffrey Epstein working for Israel, a charge met with pushback on the network, of course. The House Oversight Committee released shreds further light on the Epstein entanglement with Israel, primarily through the figure of Barak, not Obama, Ehud Barak, a long known associate of Epstein who has insisted that he only saw the convicted pedo on occasion and never in the presence of women or girls. That makes it so much better. Uh, the recently released tranche of emails adds a raft of disclosures in recent years that the two men were far closer than Barack publicly let on. If him staying in Epstein's apartment when he visited the UN in New York was not enough of a giveaway. Ironically, many of those disclosures came in the wake of Barack's apparently Epstein-backed attempt to reignite his political careers. In June of 2019, after spending years attacking Netanyahu's increasing and extreme corruption embroiled rule, Barak, a former defense minister and military chief of staff, officially came out of retirement and formed a new party to challenge him. In a chat with former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, you'll recall Steve Bannon was in the White House for Trump's first term for just shy of a year. I think he left.
Yeah, and Bannon worked for Epstein.
Yeah, that was
Oof.
yeah that. There's definitely more we can go on about that, and I think it does bring
Yeah.
that up a little more. So I'll continue. Epstein implied the move he was doing shared a report from the Israeli outlet Ynet Global about Barak's announcement. I've been busy, Epstein wrote with follow-up messages. Wow, Bannon replied, 3 exclamation point. Apparently, editor's note here is that Jackman cleared up Epstein's bizarre punctuations for clarity. And I will note, if you do read these emails, he writes like a toddler. So make of that what you will. I'm dealing with Ehud in Israel, making me crazy. Epstein elaborated 12 minutes later. Ehud, massive. Can we announce I'm his strategic advisor? Bannon asked. That's interesting. Bannon was Ehud Barak's advisor against Netanyahu, of all people. There will be a long campaign, elections in September 17th. Lots to talk about, Epstein wrote back. This is brilliant, wrote Bannon. Thanks. Only the first step, Epstein replied before writing a quote that's so widely spread in the past week free of its context. Now you'll understand why Trump wakes up in the middle of the night sweating when he hears you and I are friends. Dangerous, replied Bannon. This is almost as let's just say rainbow as the rumors about Trump and Bill Clinton. That's how these read.
You mean Bubba?
Oh, my apologies here. And of course, Putler had the blackmail.
Yeah.
There are no other details in Epstein's email about his claimed involvement in Barak's campaign, though he may have been hinting to Bannon that something like it was in the works. About a month earlier, Epstein had, apropos of nothing, sent Bannon a BBC report on Netanyahu's failure to form a coalition in the wake of Israel's April 2019 election, which would trigger another round of election to be held that September. Will Ehud be PM? Bannon asked at the end of June. Doubtful, replied Epstein. But 1, he is not to be underestimated. 2, unlikely top job, but depends on coalition. 3, driving me crazy. What helped sink Epstein's dangerous plan to reshape the Israeli political landscape fittingly was Epstein himself. Not long after these messages, the billionaire was arrested and charged on trafficking charges, and a series of scandalous revelations about Barak's ties to Epstein soon followed. Netanyahu made them the centerpiece of his political offensive against Barak, going as far as to officially requested an investigation of him from the Attorney General, putting the challenger of the defensive on the defensive and taking the wind out of the sails of Barak's attacks on Netanyahu's own criminal scandals. Severely damaged by the revelation, Barak's poorly polling party was forced to form an alliance with several other left-wing leaning parties in hope of winning seats in the Knesset. And he had essentially had to take himself out of the running for a cabinet spot to get them over the line. One can only imagine how Epstein's claimed involvement in the very political project would have further dented its standing if Netanyahu had been able to use it. Bannon's claim to being Barak's strategic advisor was likely a joke, but the two met at least once before via their mutual connection with Epstein. In a February 2018 email, Epstein asked Catherine Rumler, former White House counsel to Barack Obama, who had a mysteriously close relationship with the billionaire trafficker, whether Bill Clinton would like to, quote, join you, me, Ehud, and Steve, end quote, in a meeting they had apparently arranged, despite the email already being reported on outlets by CNBC and the New York Post. Each wrongly published the reference to Barack's first name as Chud, thereby obscuring his identity. You can't Chud Barack. You can't make this up.
Chud Barack.
Upon learning that Epstein had a hand in Barack's sudden return to politics a year later, Bannon immediately tried to make himself useful to the former prime minister. My guy is in Israel. Can we connect him to Ehud? Bannon asked Epstein. On it, Epstein wrote back. Bannon's guy, he made clear, was Aaron Klein. Almost certainly the former Jerusalem bureau chief of Breitbart, who had played a key role in Trump's 2016 campaign following Trump's victory, became a prominent Jewish voice defending Bannon against credible accusations of anti-Semitism. Whether they came of the idea, it's clearly not. Whatever came of the idea, it was clearly not meant to be. Following September 2019 election, Klein instead became a close advisor and campaign strategist to Netanyahu, a post he still holds to this day. Well, that's very nice. The office of the Israeli prime minister did not respond to a request for comment. Old friends. Epstein is notoriously unreliable narrator, prone to self-aggrandizement, but would not have been surprising if he had a hand in Barak's 2019 comeback, given their close relationship outlined in these earlier disclosures. In 2014, Barack sent Epstein, seemingly through his wife's email address, an op-ed he had written about the danger of Netanyahu's disrespect towards Obama was placing the U.S.-Israeli relationship in, asking for, quote, your opinion and your remarks, end quote. It's not clear how edited the version Epstein sent back differed from the original, but Epstein's unmistakable writing style, filled with elementary spelling mistakes and bizarre punctuation, suggests his fingerprints throughout the piece. You know what? At least you know it wasn't written by AI. One error-riddled passage, for instance, features inordinately lengthy praise of then-Secretary of State John Kerry, who Epstein had donated money to and had the contact details of in his famous Black Book, and tried to set Bannon up with in 2018, according to a separate chat log. Kerry's spokesperson denied having a relationship or contact with either man, according to the CBS News. Others similarly error-riddled passages in the Epstein edit of the op-ed concerned the quote-unquote unique relationship between the two countries, the vital importance of asymmetric aid to U.S. aid to Israel, quote, we should never forget it, and the fact that both countries might unilaterally do things and take tough decisions from time to time that the other disagree with. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. I look, there's more to this article. I will go on, but what do you even make of this? What, like,
I mean,
well, I'll get into my final take at the end of the article, but so far it's just confirmation of everything we know, which is it's funny that Netanyahu tweeted it out, but do go on.
No, I was just going to say that it sounds like you say, childish, amateurish. I'll be honest, it's not what I expected.
I mean, like so I will save my big take for the end of it, but I will continue because it looks like we're about 2/3 the way through. Contrary to Barack's denials, other emails show regular meetings and communications between the two men. In 2011 email to Jess Staley, the disgraced former Barclays Bank CEO, whose career ended thanks to his friendship with the pedo. Epstein poked fun at a Jerusalem Post headline about then Defense Minister Brock's trip to the United States, listing meetings with several officials. It seems they forgot one person on the list, Epstein wrote, in apparent reference to himself. 5 years later, Epstein would try to get author Michael Wolff to join a meeting between him and Brock. Then later that year, made reference to another meeting the two were due to have upon Brock's return to the United States. When Larry Summers bowed out of the running for chair of the Federal Reserve, Barack emailed Epstein, a major blow to a friend, he wrote. Yet, the good side... Yes, the good side is now he is free to have fun and a life, Epstein replied. Tell you more when I see you. Oh, I'm sure you knew plenty more. Jeffrey arranged a meeting with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, whose record I had studied carefully and had written about. Noam Chomsky wrote in what appeared to be a glowing character reference letter of Epstein of an indeterminate date. We have our disagreements, but a very fruitful discussion about a number of conversation matters. If you wanted any more proof that like the Chomskys of the world were controlled opposition, if his comments on Syria were not enough to tell you that, then this should be all the proof that you need. I mean, look, I don't think either of us are really on the left, but I will always give credit where credit is due to even left-wing voices I can vehemently disagree with, but I still think are working with a solid foundation. But I will say Noam Chomsky has never been one of those. So, it's a shocker. Mr. Israel is a puppet of the American empire. Friendly terms with Epstein, who was one step removed from Ehud Barak. Who would have thought? Beats me. In August 2015, Epstein solicited Chomsky's thoughts on a then recently signed Iran nuclear deal. He forwarded Chomsky's response to Barak. Thought you might find amusing, Epstein wrote. I really find it amusing. I don't agree with everything he says, but it is fascinating, Barak wrote back. Noam is so sharp and focused. Really impressive, he added, before telling Epstein he and his wife greatly enjoyed the stay at the building on the Epstein-owned Manhattan East 66th Street and floating future dates that they could meet up. You see, the problem is, Jared Kushner already had the East 666th Street. Something like that, but,
yes.
Or maybe that was his father, Charles Kushner. So, Epstein had to settle, they had to drop a 6 there, but, to continue. Another proposed meeting between Epstein and Barak mentioned in the Oversight Committee's release, involved the two separate 2013 breakfasts with Kissinger China guy and bank executive Ariane de Rothschild. Nothing suspicious there at all. The latter is the subject of the latest drop site report drawn from Barak's hacked emails showing the two men attempting to use Rothschild's financial resources to develop cyber weapons for Israel. Now, look, if I said that, if you said that, if any of the people that we regularly reference said that, that would be an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Of course.
But because they said it, it's a great project. It's, forwarding the human experience, I guess, or whatever. End of Omerta. Even with the wealth of material that's been released, Epstein's exact relationship with Israel remains unclear, not to mention an answer to the specific question of whether or not he belonged to Israeli intelligence. While the latest disclosures show Epstein had a keen interest in Israel and its politics, they also show he held a similar interest in many countries and regions that had relationships with a variety of power players across the Middle East and around the world. But what should they mean, at a minimum, is an end to the widespread taboo that even asking the questions about the billionaire offenders links to the Israeli state. Epstein brokered the security deal for Israel and had a close friendship with one of its former prime ministers and military officials, and apparently even secretly involved himself in the country's elections. If it were any other country, it would not be remotely scandalous to wonder out loud what it could all mean. So, what could it all mean?
I mean, Epstein was more powerful and influential than any of us could have thought.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that, but I will say two things. Number one, I think Epstein's mannerisms, behavior, and spelling suggest that the obvious. He was always the front man for the Maxwells, for Robert and Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't think that's without question.
Yeah.
Number two, as for Netanyahu's motivation for putting this out there, this seems like an opportunistic move at liquidating his internal opposition by tying it to a relevant political scandal, which also makes sense why Trump has all of a sudden done a 180 on the Epstein files.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, but why, Netanyahu is doing it now partly because he's angry with Trump.
Oh yeah, yeah, that is part of it. That Trump has, let's just say, insufficiently met his needs. That there hasn't been regime change in Iran. There hasn't been an as aggressive foreign policy as they had hoped. And if you believe some of the recent information that came out, Trump's primary motivation for bombing the Iranians is the fact that the Israelis invoked nuclear blackmail.
Yes.
That if you do not bomb Iran, we will nuke them. And Trump, believing he would quote unquote prevent World War III, did his little
You mean the thing with Bubba? No.
no, 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 not that, not that. We do not speak of that. Okay, that was one and done. We're not going to relitigate that. But after Trump did his cool little bombing run with I believe they used the B-52s for that, or was that the actual B? No, the B-2s for that. He prevented World War III. He stopped the 12-day war, and of course he would never admit it, but he stopped the Israelis from using the nuclear weapons. So thank you, Mr. Trump. Very stunning, very brave, and I'm glad that you were able to stand up and do that. But yeah, it does have to do with it. I do think it's multi pronged. That number one, uh, Epstein is the front guy. He's certainly not smart enough to have coordinated all of this himself. He was the Mossad's front guy. Number two, Netanyahu is using this as some sort of internal political game. And I mean, I don't know what Netanyahu's relationship is like with the Mossad. It wouldn't surprise me if there is some tension there between the two that he might
Yeah,
want to throw.
absolutely. I mean, I would say that, they thought he was probably not the right guy, and that's why Epstein didn't want him to win. I mean, but the whole thing is ridiculous because Epstein's a Mossad agent anyways.
Oh
Like, what
yeah,
difference does it make? Um, my guess, I don't know if Netanyahu actually cares, but he's also trying to demonstrate that he was a victim of Epstein, and so was Israel.
never forget the real victims of Epstein, the state of Israel's democracy.
Yeah, like, I don't know how sincere they are about that, but they're very capable, as a people of crying crocodile tears about this.
Crying out as they strike you, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. So does he really care? I don't know, but I think he thinks that he can gain some sympathy points because he sees Trump's base, especially. I mean, they're disappearing because, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene has also resigned, and I mean, and that's what Trump wants. But that doesn't mean Benjamin Netanyahu is an easy man to please. He's not an easy master to please. So.
He's not like Bill Clinton. Yep, that's what more can you say? But yes, Netanyahu is a very cantankerous and fickle man who demands a lot of those who he views as subordinate to him, which is just about everyone. And he is it. I find this funny in two ways because he has spun this pretty masterfully, where he has said, "Oh, Israel is the real victim in all of this, and I'm the real victim in all of this." But not only that, but it came from as they said in their own description, one of the leading left wing magazines in America, putting out this article that is almost, I'm not going to say entirely, but is almost a defense of Netanyahu and his record.
Right. I mean, if anything we've learned since 2023 is that the Democrats are just as likely to support Israel as the Republicans are. Um,
Yeah, it's completely
and
bipartisan.
I think for the Democrats right now, I think they know that they're going to sweep the midterms, and Gavin Newsom is probably going to be the guy that will be running in 2028. All they've got to do is get people to forget. I mean, hopefully Israel is quiet at that time, and quote unquote, the conflict, which is extended because, of course, this past week Israel bombed a refugee center in Lebanon and killed over 24 women and children and some men. And so this is Lebanon, and of course they're still. I mean, you have Jews coming in from Israel into southern Syria, walking around Damascus, not sorry, yes, Damascus, not Aleppo, and basically saying, God has also granted us, he promised us this land 3,000 years ago. It's like they don't see any reason why they should stop, because there's no suffering. If they don't suffer consequences, they'll keep going. Um Anyways.
Which does make you wonder in terms of suffering consequences. So far, the only consequences that have been suffered was the 12-Day War, which, if not for American involvement, they would have lost. Now, I will reiterate, I've said this every time I talk about the 12-Day War. Missile and drone barrages are not enough to collapse a nation, but Israel was on the backside. Israel was on the back, but they were not winning that nation. The Iranians had firepower superiority over them in virtually every engagement. And if you look at since the beginning of the October 7th conflict, even with the so called ceasefire going on right now, that's not really a ceasefire, the Israeli economy alone has suffered immensely. And you still have internally displaced Israelis who will not return to northern Israel because of the conflict zone with Lebanon, even despite the so called decapitation strikes on Hezbollah, where although yeah, I agree with everything you're saying that the Israelis are not going to stop until they suffer consequences. But point being is even the consequences they've suffered have not been sufficient, which some of these drawn out over a long enough period of time could be nation breaking. And I would argue that the very frail coalition of Netanyahu at this point is what's holding the nation together, because we go back to before October 7th. That was the main crisis in Israel, was the question of Netanyahu and his political legitimacy. And that seems to have been indefinitely shelved. But it does make one wonder, is when is that going to come to a head again? Because that is not a resolved issue. There's still several things that would need to be taken care of with that. Now, I do want to show that picture you sent me earlier, because this was in regard, you mentioned the midterms, so uh, it does show the state of the Trump coalition right now, and MAGA so called, and its political viability in the future. But this is what it feels like sometimes with that. Last man standing. It's that they're all just one by one, uh, disappearing with that, and
Yes.
it's. I mean, I don't know what more you can really say about all this, and that, uh, with the crisis in the Middle East especially, but to a lesser extent Russia and Ukraine, I think going back to what we were saying in 2024 is that Trump is being set up to fall on his sword on these issues, and that he's the fall guy. He's the guy, to get the, to reference our Jackman article earlier, to get the chuds back into the system, so to speak.
Hmm.
So you put your life and livelihood and resources on the line for a system that hates you, and then he falls on his sword. He's blamed for all the failures that, while yes, he did have a hand in, he's not the solely responsible agent for those failures. And then you get Gavin Newsom and the Rainbow Empire's back. That's the time frame they have for
Yes.
the next decade.
Yeah. And we know the Rainbow Empire will be just as committed to Ukraine, potentially opening up a new war in somewhere else in Europe against Russia.
Or even the Asia Pacific, for that matter.
Yes, I was just going to say that. 2027, there was that admiral about 2 years ago who you know, leaked or had an article where it was said he expects a war by 2027. Now, this is provocation. Obviously, like America would like China to invade Taiwan, right? And you have, the new Japanese prime minister, which is a woman. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. I think it starts with a K.
We talked about her last week. I think it's her last name is uh Tanichi or something like that because I mentioned that she pleasantly surprised me with the energy sanctions position that was actually somewhat in touch with
Yeah,
reality.
but she's talking about protecting Taiwan, right? And this infuriated the Chinese.
I mean, what
It,
kind of
it will be something along these lines. She may have just been testing the water, but there's no way a Japanese prime minister can independently say that without America approving them of saying that. There are small issues that the master will allow the vassal to dictate on his own terms, but not this.
do you know how you
And
know this wasn't
it's
authentic?
suspicious how quiet America has been after she's made this statement. Go ahead.
You know how you know that this was not an authentic statement that this came from Washington.
Mm.
Any self-respecting Japanese nationalist would have called it Formosa.
Yeah.
But no, we're not at those levels. But yeah, I agree that I I've always thought conceptually, yes, they would like China to attack Taiwan. They would like to have that as a casus belli in the region. But I think that people do lean too much on the Ukraine comparison because in terms of supplying Taiwan to fight a protracted war against China, that's simply not in the cards. I still maintain that anywhere in East Asia, anywhere in the Asia Pacific where that kind of conflict would take place is the Korean Peninsula. And even then, the
Mm.
supply chains with the being a peninsula connected to mainland China would be much trickier, but of course it would be an easier nut to crack than, say, supplying Taiwan. And while I do think Taiwan is certainly a flashpoint, while I think many places in Southeast Asia are a flashpoint, my gut tells me, I could be completely wrong about this, but my gut tells me any major conflict in East Asia would be on the Korean Peninsula.
Mm. I mean, it's an interesting thought. It would be logistically easier for America, but it would also be far more logistically easier for China and
Yes,
Russia.
yes.
I wonder how much of a dissuasive factor that is.
That yes, that is correct because Russia and China both have that border with North Korea. So, what advantage we have is arguably almost negated by that, which does make one wonder if the Philippines or the South China Sea. But like I said, while I think Taiwan is the flashpoint, Taiwan is the point that everyone focuses on, which not without good reason. It seems like the least logistically, um, let's just say, accommodating to any sort of American or Western effort. And
Hmm.
that one thing, even without the Korean Peninsula, maybe the Philippines, help, maybe even Vietnam, because I know that's massive land border with China too, but it's also, to my understanding, still a quite rural, overgrown area along the Chinese Vietnamese border. And then there's also the question you're getting more into South Asia at this point. Uh, what games behind the scenes can be played with China and your relations? What influence does the U.S. have to try to, say, break that BRICS alliance?
Yes.
But then if you go even further west, where it all converges, the reason why I think on top of the Zionist elephant in the room, Iran is so important because Iran is the trifecta if you want to um, have your foothold in the Middle East to placate the Zionists. If you want to get one over on Russia, if you want to get one over on China, Iran is the key one there because that's Russia's southern flank. That's China's energy cash cow to an extent. China gets plenty of its energy from Russia as well, but they have a very developed economic relationship with the Iranians. And then you also just have the Zionist question, and that's why I think even though there are machinations in Europe, there are machinations in East Asia, Iran is still the most likely because it checks all the boxes.
It is, and it's the weakest of the trifecta.
Yes. Without
China will not get involved. China does not have the capability to help Iran. Russia can, but Russia's occupied right now. which would mean like they would want this war in Ukraine to continue, and then they would make a move on Iran, and that would be like an audible instead of triggering something in Europe. So the rhetoric in Europe can just be about um, making sure that the European populations understand that Russia's the evil empire, Russia bad, West good, Ukraine good. Meanwhile, something happens in Iran, and like, I mean, it would be foolhardy if they went in. Which is why they would want again to uh, pursue some kind of decapitation strike. But right now Iran is in the middle of literally executing suspected Mossad agents after the 12-day war
I mean, look at
in
how
the
many
summer.
Afghans and Indians they've deported for
Yes,
suspect of being spies.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
the Afghans especially, who they've offered,
Something like 1 million.
yeah, a million of them refuge as their country collapsed into tribalism and civil war. Oh, since the Soviet invasion, mind you, and
Hmm.
that's the repayment they get for helping their neighboring country. That's the repayment they get for their generosity to their so-called Muslim brothers, and that's how it turns out. But I will say, in terms of Iran, in terms of regime change there, yes, it would have to be a decapitation strike. Yes, the Iranians are shoring up their internal security, and that it does present quite a challenge because, barring a complete American militarization, along with probably a coalition of Western powers from Europe, who at the same time would have to keep Russia at bay in regard to either an ongoing or frozen Ukrainian conflict, you would also have to look at the proxy forces available in the region. The Arabs, especially from the Gulf, are not a formidable fighting force under any circumstance, especially compared to the Iranians. No, not at all. That leaves the Turks. You think the Turks are going to throw? I'll present a scenario in which I think it is possible, but they getting the Turks to throw themselves into a war against the Iranians without some sort of major concessions that would create a huge problem for the West down the road. It's inviable. You can promise better access to Central Asia because we can see right now they're building that corridor between Turkey and Azerbaijan in order to project power across the Caspian into the Turkic country of Central Asia. Iran, in many ways, is a stumbling block to that, and they would like to see the Iranians neutralized because of that. But if you were to secure Turkish cooperation, and in terms of regional players that could actually take on the Iranians, the Turks are some of the few that actually even have something close to a chance of doing so. The bargain you would have to make with the Turks would almost not be worth it from the Western perspective.
Yeah, like the thing about Iran, of course, even from a Turkish perspective, is if Erdogan does indeed have this dream of a pan-Turkic um, empire, but I use that in quotes. I don't actually mean. I don't want to overstate that,
Yeah,
but
like
he
not an
does
empire
want.
in the traditional sense, but like a pan-Turkic coalition, as it were.
Right, right. If he were to, I mean, he could pursue that more effectively if Iran was defeated. If Iran did have a regime change, he could do that because, of course, Iran, along with Russia, probably has the most amount of intelligence working in Central Asia. And Central Asia is mostly Turkic, Asiatic Turkic. Like the kind that made up probably the majority of the foot soldiers and some of the cavalry of the Mongolians. That's where they are, and those countries are either indifferent or hostile to Iran, including Afghanistan. Um, Afghanistan could be tricky, of course, right? The Afghans, of course, now believe there are parts of Pakistan that should be incorporated into Afghanistan. So
Yes, and they were having border skirmishes with the Pakistanis
yeah, just
where they
recently.
were succeeding.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's all very volatile, which is why I think that that corridor from Turkey to India is where you're most likely to have the next conflict. That, like I said, that's not to say that Poland and the Baltic aren't flashpoints. That's not to say that the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, Philippines, etc., aren't all flashpoints in and of themselves. But that corridor from Turkey to India, I think, is where you have the most volatility.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if Iran should fall, then really, there would be a cooperation between the Turks and the Americans to flip Central Asia.
Which is something they
Uh,
wanted to do in the 90s.
to,
In fact, they actually tried to
yes,
use Pakistan to project power into Central Asia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but that completely failed because some of the Central Asian countries wanted to work with Pakistan.
yeah,
Uh, but that could be the play, especially if the war in Ukraine is as much as a failure as it looks like, especially if the challenges of East Asia look insurmountable, and the Iranian question is coming to a head. You could see all those things playing out, which is why I've said for the past several episodes, the point I keep hammering on, uh, the Turkic world is, when it comes to people who cover global events, many of whom are good, many of whom are very talented people in this regard, but analysis of the Turkic world of Central Asia is completely slept on, which is why I try to bring so
yeah,
much attention to it.
yeah.
But unless you have any last minute stories, that's all I really had for this week.
Well, I did send you a photo that you've conveniently ignored
Oh,
of
you're right. I'm bought and paid.
Alex Jones'
I am bought
famous
and paid
video
for.
from 7 years ago.
I am bought and paid
You
for.
know,
Let me.
back when your show started,
Oh yeah, hold on. This is in. It's not the actual video clip, but for those who
it's not the
know,
video clip, but it's a still from the video clip where it says, there's actually a video out there where Trump is apparently sucking on somebody's ding dong. Blah, blah, blah. And forget the young man's name. Just look at him. He's like, what the hell? This was not rehearsed.
no, it was not. But for those who saw it, you can hear the image. I can hear the image. You can hear the image.
Yes.
But you know what? This was actually a very important thread we did have to pick up from next week. So from last week, I'm sorry. So I'm glad you did bring that up, and I feel that we've had a very fruitful discussion. In the meantime, if you have any other last minute pressing stories, I think
No.
nothing can top this. But thank you everyone for tuning into another episode of the War Report. For it because we will probably be gone over the course of the holiday week. For those of you of my audience who are in the United States, as I am myself, I'm sorry, Leafs excluded. Um, Happy Thanksgiving if I don't see you before then. And we'll keep cranking out shows as long as we can before we get gotten before the drone technology gets good enough to silence us permanently. But until then, we've made it almost 8 years at this point. I think we can keep chugging along until we get to the 2029 war, in which case I think all shows will be over. I don't think there'll be much of anything left. but
Yes.
but until then, we see you guys next time.
Goodbye and take care.